Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about competitive elections across the Western world, and just using the United States as a guide or to kick off the conversation here. Only about 40, give or take, about 40 districts, electoral districts in the United States Federal House of Representatives. Only about 40 districts are what you'd call competitive. 2% either way can decide the outcome. In some cases, just a handful of votes, less than 100 votes can decide the winner. So it's very much, they're hotly contested districts where there's about an even number of Republican voters and Democrat voters in there. But most of the districts, and they've been written up this way on purpose, most of the districts in the House of Representatives are firmly in one direction or another. Now, the Democrats have been practicing gerrymandering for quite some time. They scream and cry if the Republicans attempt to do it, but it's very much baked into their way of doing things, the Democrats. So they've got a large number of electoral districts that will vote Democrat, no matter what, and they've got a few that would be in the category where, unless there's a big surge, some huge unexpected surge, that they're going to be Democrat. But there's a lot of Democrat districts where, the 80-85% Democrat. So there's no way they're under any threat, regardless. The Democrats going to. So this in turn puts a lot of pressure on pre-selection. Now, who's given, because whoever's given the Democrat nod to run in that electoral district is going to win, and they'll have a job for life. They're not going to lose this. They're not under any sort of threat of losing their district. So. Or losing the election. So it ceases to be a democratic exercise at that point. If that person, no matter how bad they are, is still going to always win, then it ceases to be a democracy, the choice of the people, where the ideas and the policies and the achievements and so on count. It isn't going to count there. Now, there can be absolute wild cards, like a third political force suddenly appears and that splits the vote, and that can happen. But it's very rare, and that splitting the vote effect seems can be decisive, but only in the seats that are maybe in the 10 to 15%, 60%, 65% Democrat type vote. Those that would be the seats vulnerable there. The 75, 80, 85% type Democrat, they're not under any threat. But the pre-selection process is controlled not democratically, but is controlled by the party machine and the Democrat Party machine. And now they can have some wild card outcomes occasionally, but again, a lot of this is supported tacitly, at least, by the Democrat Party machine anyway, such as AOC winning in New York. And he got this brain dead hack, barmaid, part-time barmaid. Who ends up winning elections, now represented from the federal government. I mean, you know that your government is being destroyed and undermined from within if people like that are getting elected to anything, let alone the federal House of Representatives. So how can you create a democratic system, though? How can you create a system that isn't going to be gamed as it is currently, whether through gerrymander, or whether it's through getting illegal aliens to vote, or whether it's through stacking certain areas with migrants so that they vote one way or another? I mean, the gaming of the system is rampant, which it shouldn't. I mean, in the most sophisticated first world economy and democracy, you'd think that the systems and processes and administration would be well above, the political fray, and there would be so many checks, balances, and so on in place that it would be impossible to game the system. And yet we saw in the 2020 presidential election and even the Senate elections of that year just how heavily gamed it was, how corrupted it was. It's quite astonishing. Even in the 2024 election, just consider this, that Kamala, one of the most, next to Biden, one of the most useless candidates that ever ran for the office of president, She got the fourth, wait for this, the fourth most votes, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth most votes ever in a presidential election. That she's number 4. Just let that sink in, and it'll give you an idea of the level of subversion and corruption and gaming of the system that still goes on. And now President Trump and his team are doing a lot of things to clean that up. And assuming they're successful in cleaning it up, it'll be much, much harder for Democrats to game the system, and thus much harder for them to win elections. Now, with the tidying up of the supposedly 1.5 million illegal aliens were voting, and also the other irregularities and practices, that this could be worth as many as 20 plus seats to the Republicans. Now, if you look at the margin of winning that the Democrats typically have in the House of Representatives, then they will struggle to win the House of Representatives at the next election, for example. Again, assuming President Trump's much needed reforms have taken place. Why weren't these reforms attempted earlier by Republican administrations? It's very strange when you know that there's deliberate and substantial subversion of the electoral system. Why would you do it? But coming back to the primary point of this essay is how, when there are so many electoral districts that the outcome is effectively predetermined, then must there be then very open pre-selection processes? So just the preferred flunky, preferred stooge of the party machine just doesn't get up all the time, which most of the time they do. Again, there are some aberrations, but then the one that gets up, if the party machine, one doesn't get up, are the ones supported by Soros or the NGOs. So there's still outside subversion and corruption of the system. I'm talking about absolute democracy here. Now, in districts where traditionally they get 85, for example, 85% vote in one area, should that be the threshold? Should say, okay, well, if you don't get 85%, assuming that's the average, if you don't get 85% of the vote, then we're going to, you haven't won that seat. How do we ensure, in terms of the system and the rules, how do we ensure that every electoral district is competitive, where someone else can win or you can lose? If it doesn't matter if you got 80%, if the average is 80%, you only get 77%, then you've lost that seat, buddy. So to try and get some competition into, or rewrite electoral districts so that they're as near as, damn it, 50% Republicans, 50% Democrats in that area, give or take, roughly half and half. So it creates a competitive electoral. So now there's, there could be an independent electoral district boundary commission, for want of a better term, that they're completely independent, and there are stringent measures to ensure that independence, and they decide the electoral boundaries. And again, their mission is to create as close to 50-50 as they can. Now, they won't be able to do it in every single situation, I get that, but that would be their mission, so that there's an absolute wild card factor there, where 1% of the vote in either direction, in a finely balanced seat, can determine the outcome of that electoral district. And that's far more preferable than the entrenched mafia that exists at the moment, not simply in the United States, but elsewhere. Now, in Australia, there is an electoral boundary commission. It's far from perfect, but it does mean that there can be a high turnover of electoral districts, depending on, again, various other factors that may apply. Maybe a particularly popular leader or particularly unpopular one, and these sorts of things. In a recent federal election in Australia, an absolutely chronically bad government was able to win handsomely because the other party, the Conservative Party, was even more fucking useless. So it can happen, but this idea of competition. Now, the party machine hacks and goons and flunkies, they said, well, if we can't guarantee a career, like a long-term career in politics to these people, because in the United States they've got to face an election every 2 years, but that's bullshit that they face it. In reality, only 40 odd seats, 40 odd electoral districts are the ones that are up for grabs. the rest either range from pretty safe to being rock solid safe. So they're not worried. You know, they don't have to bother. So how do you create that level of competition so that there is a higher tenor of seats? But the party machine goons say, well, if we can't offer people a long-term career in this, you know, years and years and years, you know, they quit when they feel like it, or when the party machine tells them to, and not before. Then if we can't offer that, you know, a lot of these, if it's a high turnover thing, a lot of these people will only have their seat for 2 years, maybe 4 years at best. So they'll be, you know, they don't have long-term career prospects because they could be in and out of the job within 2 years. So we can't attract talented people. Well, you're not attracting talented people anyway. So that's, I mean, some of the people in the safest electoral districts in the United States are, you know, ARC, for example, they're fucking morons. So, well, what are you talking about? Attract talented people. So the reality is that the system is not attracting talented people. It's attracting useful goon flunkies for the party machine that they can manipulate behind the curtain, and rather than have people that are dedicated to public service, which is what you want. Now, if people want to give up 2 years to public service, assuming the seat, the district turns over in the 2 years, then that should be admired and rewarded. Same as people serving, I think, you know, in terms of the public service aspect of this, same as people serving on the front line in the military. You know, you should be, well, thank you for your service. You know, you've served your country and your district, and so that should be some, and there should be rewards for that. You know, a longer term pension or you know, for some sort of retirement lump, something like some sort of incentive to say, well, thank you for your service. And I think that's important. But the material point is, how can we create a competitive environment so each political party has to come up with policies and ideas that the people will vote for. And if that can be accomplished, then that is what, you know, I think is the essence of democracy. And assuming, again, the counting isn't subverted and corrupted the way it was in 2020, and that there are stringent measures to prevent that. But the independent electoral commissions, you know, whether it be vote counting or you know, determining districts and the mix of voters in those districts, that I think is an important. This is currently left, as I understand, in the US to state governments to do, and the Democrats in particular behave in a very partisan manner, and that is a corruption of democracy. And we need to see what it is and create this. And I would hope that President Trump and his administration would look and consider it, this sort of independent electoral boundary commission, so that the great majority of electoral districts in the US are finely balanced, and where outcomes can be 1 or 2% either way can determine electoral outcomes. And I think this would add to democracy. Will it create a high turnover of seats? And so, well, yes, it potentially would. But then, for the purpose of democracy, I believe that's a good thing. You've been with Tassus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.